Okay, so this Sicha is the first of the ones from this week. It's from volume 18, and the first Sicha on Parshas Behalosecha. So at the beginning of this week's Parsha, we have the mitzvah of Aharon to light the menorah. Now the truth is, this is not the first time the mitzvah of lighting the menorah appears. It already appears two previous times. One is when he's told to build the menorah in Parshas Tetzaveh, and then it also appears again in Parshas Tzav or Likute. And now now we encounter it a third time. There are some details which are said here which are not said elsewhere. For example, that all of the lamps have to be facing the middle lamp, etc. Now the context is the beginning of this week's parsha comes the end of last week's parsha. The end of last week's parsha talks about the gifts of the Nesiim. So you remember the 5th and 6th and 7th Aliyah, which was very repetitive, the same paragraph again and again, that is describing the gifts that the Nesiim, the princes of each tribe, brought. So now we have to get some dates clear over here. There was the 7 days of Miluim, the 7 days of, I'm not sure what a good translation for that word is, but let's call it practice runs. So there were the 7 days where the Mishkan was assembled and taken down, day in, day out. And during those days, there were special korbanos that were brought on behalf of Aharon and his children. And interestingly enough, for that week, there was the tables were turned, and Moshe was the Kohen Gadol. For that week, Moshe Rabbeinu served as the Kohen Gadol. And that week were the last 7 days of the month of Adar. And then you have Rosh Chodesh Nisan. First day of Nisan is also called the 8th day of the Miluim. So, for example, in the beginning, the third parsha in the book of Vayikra is Parsha Shmini, which starts off Vahi Bayom HaShmini on the 8th day of the Miluim, which is the first day of Nisan. And then the Torah goes on to say what happened. Rashi tells us, based on the Gemara, it's a Rashi in Parshas Nosoi, that there were 8 parshas, 8 portions of the Torah were commanded from God to Moshe on that day, which is the 8th day of the Miluim, and it's also the first day of the month of Nisan, and that's kind of considered the first day when the Mishkan was in operation. Then the 12 princes come, and they say that in honor of the Chanukas HaMizbeach, the inauguration of the Mizbeach, we want to bring special gifts, special sacrifices. And indeed, Hashem commands Moshe to split them up, one for each day. And so you have in the first day Nachshon ben Aminadav, etc., etc. For 12 days, a prince of each one of the tribes of the Jewish people brings his set of korbanos. Those korbanos included things which were never to be repeated. For example, that there was keteres brought on the outside altar, etc. And that spanned from the first day of Nisan, which is the 8th of the Miluim, all the way through the 12th of Nisan. Now this parsha over here, which starts off by saying that Hashem, that telling him the rules of the menorah, when was this parsha said? So first of all, logically, we could introduce that it must have been said on Rosh Chodesh Nisan or earlier, because when does Aharon start lighting the menorah? Aharon starts lighting the menorah on the 8th day of the Miluim. That's day 1 of temple service. In addition to which, it's actually explicit in the Talmud that one of the 8 passages of the Torah that God communicated to Moses on that day is this passage of Behalosecha. Okay. Now let's see what Rashi says. Behalosecha. Why is the portion dealing with the menorah juxtaposed to the portion dealing with the Nesiim, with the princes of the tribes? Okay, now before we go into the answer of Rashi, what's the question of Rashi? So based on the introduction that we gave, the question of what's bothering Rashi is very obvious. that this doesn't belong over here. We've just finished reading the recounting of the princes bringing their things, which span from day 1 to day 12 of Nisan. This happened on day 1 of Nisan. So this parsha should have been recorded in the Torah in the middle of last week's Sedra, before we read the whole story of the tribes of the princes bringing their karbanos. Okay, so the question that Rashi is coming to address seems fairly obvious based again on that introduction. Okay, so what's the answer? Why does the Torah take this portion and record it out of place after the Nesiim? So Rashi answers that when Aaron saw on the first of Nisan, sorry, not on the first of Nisan, when Aaron saw, perhaps even on the 12th of Nisan, when Aaron saw what had transpired or what was going to transpire, that all of these Nesiim, the princes of each of the 12 tribes of Israel, got a prominent participation in the inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Mishkan, he felt left out. For when Aaron saw the delegation of the Nesiim, he felt distressed over not joining them in the dedication, neither he nor his tribe. He also wants to be part of the inauguration, the dedication of the Mishkan. And so Hashem says to him, by your life, yours is greater than theirs, for you will light and prepare the lamps. Okay, so that's why the Torah, says Rashi, that's why the Torah records this portion out of historical chronological order, because it's to make a point. It teaches us this sort of, teaches us to read in between the lines, and we deduce from this that that Aaron was distressed at not having our participation in the inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash, and Hashem comforted him and told him, "Don't worry, what you do is even better than what they do." Okay, so a number of points to ponder on this story. Number one, why is what Aaron does greater? In other words, it doesn't really say anything. It just says Aaron was distressed. So Hashem says, don't worry, yours is greater. Well, why is his greater? You haven't really solved the problem. In other words, Aaron was clearly distressed. So clearly Aaron thinks that whatever he's doing is not, that whatever they did was greater than what he did. So now God says, no, now yours is greater than theirs. Like, okay, like how does that help? Doesn't seem to be any explanation of what is that was bothering Aaron and how the problem was solved. One more question, which we'll focus on, is why does Hashem choose from all of the different things that Aaron was going to do? What is Aaron going to do in the temple? He's going to light the menorah. He's going to bring the sacrifices. He's going to bring the keteras. He's going to do the service of Yom Kippur. Going to be the only person to ever be allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. The keteras, explicitly, it says how the keteras has tremendous powers. Why does God choose specifically the kindling of the menorah to tell Aaron that this is the thing that you're doing that not only parallels but even outshines and is even greater than what the other princes of the tribes did? Okay, so let's again recap two questions. Number one, what is it about kindling the menorah that is greater? What exactly is the answer to Aaron's question? And B, why is that answer specifically to be found in the menorah and not in any of the other services of the high priest? These questions, as well as the other questions, are all asked by the classic commentaries, and the Rebbe is going to show us something which is sort of unique to the, like as we've come to learn, the Rebbe's approach to Rashi. Okay. So the Rebbe starts off by introducing that what was bothering Aaron was not that he doesn't do service in the temple. Yeah, he knows he's doing service in the temple, but this was a very specific thing that was disturbing him, namely that he was not joining them in the dedication, in the inauguration. Chanukas Hadasiyah, the inauguration of the princess. Aaron wanted to have a part in the inauguration of the temple. And here he felt, okay, I'm doing all the services, but why is it that the inauguration and the dedication of the temple, I am not given a part in? And as the commentaries explain, he saw that as perhaps being a sign that he hadn't been atoned for his part in the golden calf, right? Because don't forget, Aaron, we come across this a number of times, that Aaron has, if you will, a chip on his shoulder about that, and he's second guessing it, and he needs Moshe to comfort him. And the tabernacle, the Mishkan, which comes to atone for that. So here Aaron's going to be super sensitive to anything what might allude to him not being given sort of equal chance. And Hashem tells him, no, you don't understand. Lighting the menorah is also part of the inauguration. Shelcha Gedola Shelahem, your portion is greater than theirs, meaning your job in your duty, your lighting the menorah, is not just something that you're going to do as part of the temple service, like you do lighting bringing the Ketores and bringing Korbanos and all the other amazing things that you're going to do on Yom Kippur, etc. That's all good. But specifically, Aaron's kindling of the menorah for the duration of those 12 days, which every day there was this 12-day long inauguration, right? That consisted as that was Hashem is telling him, no, that is indeed your part of the inauguration. And there's a very strong expression of it. It's like an oath by your life. It's like in English you have an expression to the opposite, over my dead body, right? So this is the opposite of that. Like, I'm promising you by your life, yours is greater than them. Yours, what you're doing is also part of the dedication of the temple. Now, how long is an inauguration? Like when is something new and being inaugurated, and when like you have, I don't know, what do you have nowadays that you inaugurate? Like for airline, sorry,
president gets inaugurated.
Right. So there, it's a ceremony of an hour, but you have, I don't know, for example, airlines when they first get, the Concorde or the 777, whatever, the big jet, the A380,
Smash a bottle on a ship.
So they have they have an inaugurating flight. Right, but is it the first hour of the flight that's inaugurating? Is it the entire flight? Like, what's going on?
The Hindenburg was an inauguration flight.
That didn't end very well.
It didn't go very well.
Right. So, for example, it's interesting to note that in Parshas Nosai, in the previous parsha, where the Nesiim come to bring the carbon, just a second. Nosai 7. Let me actually show you this inside. Hold on. So it says here that they brought offerings for the dedication of the altar on the day that it was anointed. And Rashi says, Moses did not accept it from their hands until instructed to do so by the Almighty. But, Rashi doesn't bring it, but the Zifri brings in this pasuk that on the day it was anointed was that they wanted to bring it all on day one, or Moses wasn't sure they should, and God says to him, no, one for each day, right? And in fact, the Erection spells it out over there clearly. He says, it seems that all the Nesim came forward as one and wanted to bring offerings on the first day of the dedication of the Mizbeach, for they wanted it to be dedicated by all of them together. But Hashem said, no, one Nasi for each day. And he further said that all 12 days on which Nesim would bring their offerings will be considered Mizbeach dedication period, right? So already we find this idea that already for the Nesim, Hashem extended and said, no, this entire 12 days are one unit or one, however you understand it, of inauguration dedication period. And so what Hashem is saying to Aaron at the beginning of our parasha is that for the duration of those very same 12 days, every time you light the menorah, that's that's inauguration menorah lighting. And then you continue lighting the menorah every day. In fact, the Erection actually takes this whole thing a step further, because the Erection says that there's an opinion in the Gemara which the Erection brings a number of proofs for, and he's very strongly following that opinion, that the lamps of the menorah came off. That they were removable, the top piece where the flame was, that was removable. They would take them off, and every day they would take them off and clean them and put them back. And so he says that not only was Aaron's dedication, he says every single day, every day was dedication of the menorah, because it was sort of rebuilding it, almost reassembling it every day. It was a daily inauguration. So that's how he. The menorah hammered out of one single piece of gold. Yeah, that's the base. But then there's the lamp, the piece where the oil goes in. He brings. That was a different piece. Yeah, well, it's machlokas in the Gemara. I'll show it to you here. Hold on. So the Erection brings this. I'm reading you from the Art School Erection. The Erection is in the beginning of this week's parasha, and he introduces it. He brings it the Gemara in Menachos, chapter 88b. So there's one opinion that he would remove the lamps and leave them in the oil moed, where they would be cleaned out and put in new oil. And the other opinion holds that they were fixed, but they were sort of a little bit flexible so that they could be bent down. And so he says he goes on to bring three proofs from the Torah that they were removable. Says number one, says the Torah here in Parshas Behalosecha is referring to the menorah for the third time, and he tells him to light the candles all facing inward to the middle one, and they had to be sort of pointing in that direction. So he says, you already told me to build the menorah in Parshas Tetzaveh. That's when you should have told me to build them inward, pointing inward. So that's proof that actually that part that was to be built inward were removable, and then you could put them back in whichever position you wanted. Then he says, if you look in Parshas Bamidbar, it says that they would take, when they would dismantle the Mishkan and travel with it, they would take a cloth of turquoise wool and cover the menorah and its lamps and its tongs and its spoons and its vessels of oil. So it's clear that it's covering the lamps and all the other tools as separate items. And his third proof is a verse in the book of Divrei Hayamim, where also it sort of it refers to the menorahs and the lamps, which again as separate things. Okay. Now Rashi doesn't say anything like that there was inauguration every day, but the Rebbe is explaining us to understand this Rashi that that 12-day period was a period of inauguration. So now we've already answered the first the one question that we asked. The second question that he asked was, why does Hashem tell him comfort Aaron with the menorah more than any other service, Yom Kippur Keteres? Because the question is not service. What was bothering him was, why is he not taking part in their inauguration? And the answer is, you are. The menorah lighting, specifically the menorah lighting for these 2 days, for these 12 days, is inauguration. And what remains left to be seen is two things. First of all, why? So why was the menorah lighting able to be inaugurated for 12 days, but not other things? And B, why is that type of inauguration better than the other inaugurations? Okay, we'll see that in a moment. I just want to point out also that this is mentioned in the past. This Sicha is from Tafshin Chafei, 1965, which was the first year after the passing of the Rebbe's mother, where the Rebbe introduced the whole concept of the Rashi Sichos. And usually in that year, the Rebbe would dwell on the first and the last Rashi of any given parsha, which is what this is. Okay, so now we're going to do a careful reading. It says that yours is greater than theirs. What does he say? Sha'ata madliko meiti v'saneris. That you, for you, will light and prepare the lamps. Now, it's interesting that Rashi adds the words prepare. Hatovas haneres. Preparing means to clean out the old wick, to put in a new wick, to fill up the oil. But the Torah here doesn't say anything like that. The hate of the mitzvah to prepare the menorah is spoken about in Parshas Tetzaveh, but it doesn't mention it here. So why is Rashi talking about preparing the lamps? So the Rebbe said that each one of these three words are another sort of allusion, if you will, to allusion to understanding why it is, what is it about Aaron's inauguration, part in the inauguration, that is greater than that of the other Nesiim. So number one, he says, for you, right? The Nesiim, they brought all those karbanos, the cows, and then what did they do with it? They gave it to the Kohanim to bring. So even though they were doing it, they were bringing it, they were donating it, but the actual service was not carried out by them. They had the agents, the Kohanim, to carry it out on their behalf. Whereas here, he's telling him, you will light and prepare the lamps. You don't need to do it, give it to anybody else. You're going to get to do it. Not only that, with every carbon, with anything you could do, there's part A and part B. Part A is facilitating it, bringing it to the temple, or whatever it is, and part B is actually execution. So the Nesiim, they only did part A. They facilitated it. Execution was done by the Kohanim. Rashi says, you, what will you do? Light and prepare. So in other words, Rashi is emphasizing, even though it doesn't talk about the preparation over here, but Rashi is emphasizing that both the facilitating of this mitzvah and the mitzvah itself are done by Aaron himself. So that's another reason why Aaron's is greater than theirs. And then finally he says, the menorah is that what their inauguration was on the exterior mizbeach, whereas his was the menorah, which is in the inside, in the holy. In other words, it's in a much more sacred section of the mizbeach. So again, just a careful reading of the Rashi already shows us. Again, let's just recap. Rashi asks, why does this passage come over here? Chronologically, it belongs in the middle of last week's parasha. Answer is, Hashem is telling us a message here that Aaron was distressed. What was he distressed about? That he didn't get a portion in the inauguration of the temple. And for that, the answer is, that he does have a part, that lighting the menorah for those 12 days is a part in the inauguration. And not only is it a part, it's an even greater or betterer than their part, because A, he gets to do both the facilitating and the execution himself, and B, it's in the holier section of the Mishkan. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper over here. Okay, so if you look in Parshas Pekudei, which is the story of the erection of the base of the Mishkan, so it seems quite obvious from the context. Hashem spoke to Moshe, you should place the ark, you should bring in the temple, Moshe is doing all of this. And then it says, he placed the table of tent of meeting, the northern side. He set upon them the arrangement of bread. He kindled the lamps. He placed the golden altar. He made the Ketores go up in smoke, right? So this again is talking about the Shmini Miluim. This was on the first day of Nisan, the 8th day of the practice runs, which is the first day of Nisan. And Moshe Rabbeinu did all of these things, right? Now, inauguration is when you start using for something for its intended purpose. Yeah, if we're going to use the metaphor that we used before of a flight, a test flight is not an inaugurating flight. You have a test flight and then you have an inaugurating flight. Now, one of the differences between a test flight and an inaugurating flight is, are you doing what you would usually do with this, or you're doing something else? So, for example, again, in the metaphor of a flight, a test flight might just take off and do a few spins and come right back down. A regular flight is going from A to B. So all of these things that Moshe Rabbeinu did, was he doing them the way they are usually done year-round, or was he doing them in a bit of a different way? If he was doing them in a bit of a different way, then that's part of the practice run. That's not inaugurating. If he's doing them the regular way, then Moshe Rabbeinu did the inaugurating, and you can no longer say that Aharon did the inaugurating. Now, the Rebbe explains at length elsewhere that according to Rashi, Moshe Rabbeinu one second. That when it comes to the other services, for example, the Ketores is brought every day, twice a day, in the morning and the evening, year round. We speak every morning and davening. We say that, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu on that day 8 of practice, or day 1 of Chanukah, of inauguration, Moshe Rabbeinu did the Ketores morning and evening. So you asked me a question: why does Hashem pick the menorah? Why not the Ketores? The answer is Aharon didn't inaugurate the Ketores. Moshe Rabbeinu did the Ketores on day 1. The menorah, however, according to Rashi, and again, this is something which the Rebbe elaborates on elsewhere. According to Rashi, Moshe Rabbeinu lit the menorah in the morning. What's the mitzvah to light the menorah? Bein ha'arbaim. The Rambam actually does have a different opinion, but the normative, common approach, and certainly the approach of Rashi, is that the daily mitzvah to light the menorah is to light it once in the afternoon. So Moshe Rabbeinu, when he lit the menorah in the morning, that was the test flight. That wasn't inaugurating. And that's why it's specifically the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. That's why it's specifically the mitzvah of lighting the menorah that can be considered for Aharon to be the inauguration. And Hashem adds that not only was day 1 inauguration, but all 12 days was part of the inauguration. But Hashem couldn't have chosen the Ketores or any other thing, because those were done for the first time by Moshe Rabbeinu.
Are they sacrificing on these first days?
Oh yeah, lots of sacrifices. All the ones we just spoke about. The princes brought all the cows, yeah, besides the daily ones. All right, so now we're going to conclude with Meyeno Shel Torah. Does he have this Sicha in the Gutnick Chumash?
No.
Okay. Meyeno Shel Torah, the Chassidus of the Sicha. Let's pull it up over here. Maybe it'll be easier to read this part together. Should we do English or French, Bob?
Oh, I'm saying definitely French.
Spanish.
Oui. Here, if you turn the letters 90 degrees, isn't it?
Oh, a note to our readers. for technical reasons, are unable to publish translation. In this case, we offer this adaptation, which summarizes each section. Oh well, let's see how that works out for us. Okay, so he's put 11 and 12 together. Let's read this together. The menorah's superiority over the altar also related to their relative spiritual effects. So, a couple of points. We've said that again, until now we've been approaching this from a pshat level. Now we're approaching it from sort of a chassidus perspective. But we're specifically choosing Aaron's portion to be in lining the menorah over the keteres and other things. Another interesting point to mention in the Rashi, which the Rebbe focuses on here, is that Rashi says this in the present tense, that you light and prepare the menorah in the present tense. Apparently, seemingly would have been more appropriate to use past tense, because this is after the 12 days. You did light the menorah and for the 12 days. So why is it saying in the present tense? So the Rebbe explains this based on what the Rebbe writes in this week's Likute Torah, that there are 7 types of Jews, 7 types of ways of serving, different ways of serving Hashem, corresponding to the 7 branches of the menorah. And Aaron is the one who invigorates and ignites, etc., the Jewish people with that thing. So that's why it's in the present tense. But let's see how they've adapted this. The Hebrew word for the dedication of the Mishkan, chinuch, also means education. In educating a child, we lavish him with attention and reward him in order to encourage him to apply himself to his studies and to character development well into adult life, right? So on the first day of school, you send lots of treats. In a person's personal divine service, the education of the altar represents the leaders drawing down an abundance of divine light to those among the Jewish people who were prepared to assimilate it properly. But this was a one-time event, limited revelation available to those able to reach a new and elevated state in the service of Hashem, right? So the princes who brought for the 12 days, the leaders who brought for those 12, those inaugurating gifts, on a spiritual level, that was sort of a one-time opportunity where they were giving lavish gifts, spiritual gifts, to the Jewish people who were already engaged, and to elevate them to even greater heights. But Aaron was concerned that his spiritual education of souls represented by his lighting of the menorah would also be limited to only those souls capable of receiving the menorah's light. Again, just like the Nesiim, like their gift was only there to people who were already in it, and they were able to sort of give them more gifts to encourage them more, but that wasn't able to take somebody who was completely disengaged and engage them. And Aaron wanted to be able to reach even those Jews who were completely disengaged. And to assuage this concern, Hashem told Aaron, by your life, yours is greater than theirs, for you light to prepare the lamps. Light and prepare is written in the present tense, alluding to the fact that Aaron's influence was to be ongoing and permanent. Unlike the leader's education, which could only be directed to receptive souls, Aaron's education uplifted every Jew, even if on the surface they did not appear ready for divine inspiration. So it's in the present tense, not just chronologically present tense, but also conceptually. It's always, when something is in the present tense, that means it's always applicable, because wherever and whenever you are, you're saying it's in the present. So in other words, even souls who are on a very low level, they are also receptive to that. The source of this spiritual endurance was Hashem's oath by your life. An oath is a forceful statement, a guarantee, which alludes to a lofty revelation of godliness that empowered Aaron to bestow his light upon all Jews for all time. Okay, now what's the lesson? Okay, the takeaway. And so the Rebbe finishes off the Sikh by saying the lesson is that when encountering a Jew who seems uninspired, unwilling to engage in divine service, do not despair. When you engage with him with Mesiras Nefesh in your efforts to light his soul, soon the candle of his soul will shine bright with the light of Torah and Mitzvahs. And if we have here another 2 minutes, I'll finish with a good story. I'll let you hear it from the horse's mouth. Just a moment. All right, folks, listen to this.
Hi, I have to share with you this amazing story that just happened Friday night.
This is Rabbi Levi Notik from Free and Chabad of Uptown.
There's a fellow, Alex, who reached out a few months ago. He wants to get more involved in Yiddishkeit. So we're talking and by email back and forth. Due to COVID restrictions or concerns, he didn't want to come in person yet. And we were emailing back and forth. He wanted a mezuzah, and then there was a discussion about a price of tefillin and various general questions about Yiddishkeit. And finally, this week, he's able to come for the first time for Shabbos. And it's his first time ever at a Friday night meal, at a Shabbos meal. And as we're sitting, I asked him, what inspired your involvement or your recent interest in Yiddishkeit? Just out of curiosity, what did it? So he said, yeah, I'll tell you. I've been involved with a girl for the last few years, and the relationship was developing to the next stage, if you will, and I decided to propose marriage. So I planned it and so on and so forth, and then I asked her if she'll marry me, hoping to hear the yes. But she said, absolutely, only if you'll convert to Islam. She's a Muslim girl, and that's the only way she'll do it. I said, no, I'm Jewish, and I'm not going to convert out. Well, that ended the relationship right then and there. It was over. But I thought to myself, I'm Jewish. I don't know anything about being Jewish. Never had a bar mitzvah. Never went to a day of Sunday school. Never went to a Jewish camp. I haven't been, frankly, at a Shabbos table. I should probably find out. So I Googled and I looked for some Jewish resources. I found my local Chabad, and that's how I reached out to you. And here I am at a Shabbos dinner. And what's so inspiring here to me is that we learn in Chassidus, especially in Tanya, about the connection that a Yid has with Hashem. It's such a deep connection that it transcends how much you know, it transcends what you understand. Here's a person who does not have any Jewish knowledge. We're very, very limited. But I'm Jewish. Later I'll try to find out what it is, but I'm not going to get out of that status. I'm not going to do anything to convert or attempt. You can never leave your being Jewish, but I'm not going to denounce my faith in any shape or manner for any reason.
Okay, see you all next week. We'll have a minute.